Okay, what the... Oh.
We've got 4 people.
All right, I think we're live. Hold on.
Yeah, we are.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah, we are.
All right, so
Yeah, I am
welcome
aware there are 2
to.
streams going. We got a false title earlier. I don't know why it hasn't been deleted. I don't run the channel.
I think it's most likely that TK did it and then left, or Eugene did it and then had to go. But
TK. Was TK.
we're having Evening with Comrades again. Maybe TK will show up. Maybe not. Who knows?
Goddamn.
So tonight we have technically 4 guests, but one of them does not have Twitter, so we'll start off with Mushroom.
Hello.
We have Senna,
Hello.
Theo,
Chris Colt.
and Pac-Man.
Save the planet, nuke it hard.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, I guess we can start off by jumping right into the first story that I've been writing about for the past week, which is Xinjiang. Today marks the 10th anniversary of a major riot in, I think it's Urumqi in Xinjiang, China, that was sparked by ethnic tensions between the Han and the Uyghurs. Now, some interesting things that have happened recently in Xinjiang as well, besides this, is China, the central government, has banned the use of Uyghur as an official language in schooling.
And nothing happened.
Nothing happened. No,
Absolutely
there's definitely not like a million people in re-education camps that I've looked through Chinese government documents that calls them detained trainees. It's definitely not concentration camp. For non-Han people, it's not like Han nationalism has been on the rise for the past 30 years.
Oh, didn't they admit to this just under some weird pretense?
At this point, anyone that pretends that the People's Republic of China is in any way, shape, or form different than any other authoritarian capitalist state is either delusional, dishonest, both, or an idiot.
Okay, you can. There's 2 options. You can say it's the exact same, or you can say it's worse, because it's worse.
Okay.
Distinction without a difference.
Dip-dap.
It's the US with Chinese characteristics.
Don't you mean to tell me, Dip-dap, and I don't mean to sound pretentious here, but you mean to tell me a large, multi-ethnic, supposedly communist republic would have, I don't know, ethnic cleansing? No, that'd never happen. Marxist-Leninist states would never do that, surely.
It didn't happen. It didn't happen with the Sami in Soviet Union. No, it didn't happen. Didn't happen.
No. This is a myth. This is I call imperialist propaganda, and I'm fucking memeing. Look, this is like.
Look. Only imperialist sources talk about how the Soviet Union deported more than 2, but basically 2 entire ethnic groups, the Chechen and the Ingush, from the Caucasus into Central Asia. Only imperialist sources talk about that. Imperialist sources like the NKVD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, do you have any non-imperialist sources?
I do. It's called to these people the Chinese government. Oh wait, they're imperialist. Only bro in chat. Why did concentration camps start ramping up in 2017? Well,
Xi Jinping.
2017. The thing is that Xi Jinping was really solidifying his power in the party, and I believe that's the year that they made it to where like he really can't be ousted at all. So like now he can just do whatever the fuck he wants. Oh yeah, Zizek capitalism with Asian values. This is literally just Neo-Confucianism, but like with Han nationalism, just like Li Dajiao and like the Boxer Rebellion. Like taken to its logical conclusion. Because I was reading about
having connection issue, guys. I gotta relocate real quick to the part of the room, part of the house that has the Wi-Fi and everything.
I was reading a book about how the Chinese conceived of a race around the end of the 1800s, and they believed like this weird social Darwinism that like races should mix, and that like if a race mixed, it made it better. But like that's what the Manchu believed, because the Manchu were the Qing dynasty, and they were like, how do we make the Han stop being mad at us for being different from them? Because the leader of the Boxer rebellions, like he said, like something along the lines of, I think I had the quote actually somewhere on here. Unjust, what is more unjust and bitter in China today is to have to put up with this inferior race of nomads with wolfish ambitions, these thievish Manchus as our rulers. And that was Zhou Zhong, the leader of the Boxer Rebellion, which was like a big anti-Qing dynasty rebellion in 1899 in China.
Well, here's the thing, like,
So what you're telling me that is that Xi Jinping is blood and soil but woke.
Yes.
Well, that's pretty good description. I mean, although talking about the race mixing thing for a second, I was reliably informed by Left Book the other day that interracial relationships is colonialism. So,
oh right, yeah.
Yeah, we can't do that. So
everyone knows people of color can't actually decide to be with a white person, you know?
It's
yeah.
It's
like,
it's
that's
coercive,
ridiculous.
guys.
It's not like they can make decisions for their own lives. And maybe people shouldn't judge them for it.
Königsmark in chat asked, isn't most Chinese technically non-Han? Most 92% of Chinese are Han.
Yeah.
The fifth largest ethnic group in China is the Uyghurs, and they're getting fucked. Because I read Under the Heel of the Dragon yesterday. That book is like, okay, so Han are really racist against Uyghurs, especially in like Beijing. They're like, the Uyghurs give Beijing a bad name, those filthy thieves.
Yeah, okay, I think I can add something to this. During the days of the waning days of the Habsburg monarchy, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a conglomeration of so many different ethnic groups, and the dominant German cultural unit, particularly in Vienna, looked down upon literally all other ethnic groups. Bit less than the Hungarians, but still everyone. The Bosnians, they're a bunch of unskilled thieves and whatnot. Ooh, the Czech, they're brutal. Lots of different things. Now, so what caused this to dissipate was a good old implosion, national collapse, and well, now Vienna's a bit more bit better off. Now, the problem with China is the same problem that the Soviet Union faced, but much more exacerbated, where one dominant ethnic group essentially holds all the cards and all the power.
Yeah, and they have for 100 years.
Yeah, just like how in the Soviet Union, technically everyone was equal, but
yeah,
it's
the whole de jure de facto thing,
and,
just like in America.
You know how literally all the fucking economic power, all the military power, all the governmental power lies with the Russians.
I think it's very interesting from an Australian perspective, because Australia doesn't Australia has only ever had that sort of ethnic tension really with its indigenous population for an extended period of time anyway, which is what I find so interesting about it.
Despite
Because
making,
Australia-
despite making up 0.61% of the population, Uyghurs make up like I'm making a joke here, but like they make an extremely disproportionate amount of like in the criminal justice system in China.
Yeah, it's
so,
the same situation here as well.
Yeah.
what I would like to mention to that is that it is, I think, to an extent, not easily graspable the amount of like ethnic and linguistic diversity that exists in Europe, Asia, and Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I can walk 50 kilometers into one direction. Okay, 75 kilometers into one direction, and people will speak a different language. Check
yeah.
in that case. That's kind of incomprehensible to
Americans.
most Americans. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure,
Absolutely.
there are people in Senna's case, she could walk a few hundred kilometers south and people will start speaking Spanish. But the thing
Oh
is,
yeah.
I walk 500 kilometer into like the east, people will speak Hungarian. North, Czech. South, Italian or Slovenian. Uh, sure, the west's a bad example. Both of those speak German. But if I go 800 kilometers west, people will speak French at me. But
Mm-hmm.
all of this area is incomprehensibly small by comparison. It's kind of the same deal in, say Central Africa, although less represented by state borders as it is here, and more by
Mm-hmm.
the ethnic divisions. That you will have a community, and then you walk few hundred kilometers into a direction, and people will be speaking an entirely different dialect or an entirely different language family altogether.
Oh yeah. Uh I was reading the book and it was like Uyghurs have an extremely hard time learning Mandarin because it's a completely separate language family. One is Turkic and one is, Sinitic.
Yeah, which isn't even the same kind of language barrier that we're dealing with, because Czech,
This one.
Italian, German, not Hungarian, but are all part of that European language group. Hungarian isn't, but Hungarian has enough linguistic and pronunciation influences from all the different languages that's around it that it has become easier for us to learn than it would have been, say, 700 years ago.
Right.
Because language adapts, it's not immutable.
Oh yeah, language constantly changes. But the thing with the Uyghurs have a term called Chinese Uyghur, which literally means like a sinified Uyghur, right?
Yeah.
And that is happening more and more because the Uyghurs have been linguistically imperialized now. Their textbooks say specifically annexed Xinjiang, not conquered or conquested or whatever, right? And Only Bro in the chat said earlier, I am assuming that if the Kuomintang won the civil war, they would do the similar thing in Xinjiang. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The thing with the KMT is the founder of the Chinese Communist Party joined them too. Like Li Dajiao was a fucking like Chinese ultra nationalist. He was basically just a populist. And I read Li Dajiao. He was like, "Oh, the national rebirth of China." Like
A lot of
yeah.
That's what the Comintern was keen on,
Mm-hmm.
hence setting up the
the
school
thing is,
in
the thing
Angers.
about movements like popular movements, let's say, in Asia, in Africa, in South America, are a response to basically the trauma of colonialism, of colonial violence. And often oftentimes the natural knee-jerk reaction to, well, violence being done unto you is an eye for an eye.
To know more about Li Dajiao, I highly recommend a book called Li Dajiao and the Origins of Chinese Marxism. He went from being a part of the New Culture movement to being a left com to being an ultranationalist again.
Who founded New Youth? Was that him?
Hi, Chico.
I'm not sure about New Youth, but it was the New Culture movement
Okay.
that he was involved in.
That was a specific journal, which sort of.
Well, no.
Well, not the New Culture movement itself, the New Youth. It came out of the New Culture movement.
Annexed Xinjiang. Okay, no. I'm talking specifically about the Chinese conquest of Xinjiang in 1878, I want to say. I think that's the year. I want to say that's the year. That's when it was incorporated into the Qing, and it has remained such since. And also a lot of Uyghurs did not like that they were annexed by the PRC either. But back to this kind of stuff. On like what's happening in Xinjiang right now. Again, I used a non-imperialist source here. I don't know about Miao. I only know about the Uyghurs mainly and the Tibetans. Only, bro. But when it comes to the effects in Xinjiang, most Uyghurs don't have jobs in Xinjiang. They have a high unemployment rate. They are vastly, extremely affected by poverty, hunger, lower education, worse standards of living, worse care. If they have a job, it'll be a worse job, unless they are, as I said earlier, a Chinese Uyghur. Which basically means that they're the Chinese equivalent of an Uncle Tom, I guess would be the best terminology for it, is they literally just become Han, basically. They don't speak Uyghur anymore, they speak Mandarin, Putonghua Mandarin.
So that's the interesting question. Do they actually get accepted by? Do they get accepted by the mainstream Han population if they completely integrate, or not?
It's interesting. It's interesting because
depends on the region. What though?
Oh, sorry. No, I know a teacher, and she taught in China for a while, in a Uyghur majority area. The anecdote she gave me was one of like the kids she had worked with, much younger people, and obviously I think this is just the predisposition of kids. They won't hate someone, necessarily for their ethnicity unless they are taught to. But she saw that being instilled into them anyway by like their parents and whatnot, like hatred of the other. Because
I
she
think we
was
see a
Uyghur
lot of
and
it.
Han children.
We see a lot of it in post-colonial societies. I mean, China has had this sort of ethnic diversity.
Absolutely, but it wasn't something that had happened before. That she had known these, like, her students to get along with one another. Han or Uyghur.
A good parallel maybe the Bosnian War, where at the tail end of the existence of the SFR Yugoslavia, people that had lived together, families that had lived next to each other, that went out to the bar together, that grew up together for generations, suddenly stand up and slaughter each other over
Mhm.
ethnic divisions.
Now that I'm gonna say that Tiki's actually here now.
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Hi, TK.
Now,
Late
one
to
I,
the
thing.
I am
stream, well
alive.
done.
Now that TK
Well,
is
what's up?
here, I am going to show that a test donation you can donate at our link in the description. Please buy me coffee or books or TK a pizza for the third time this month.
Anyway,
I don't deserve pizza since I'm late to my own stream right now.
Mm.
I apologize profusely. I
No.
had alarms. I don't think they worked.
You got a pizza
No worries.
Well,
from the
Look,
PayPal.
I'm hungover, TK, and I made it. You don't have an excuse.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No
okay.
excuses.
anyway,
Unprofessional of
but-
me. I'm so sorry.
if I may just finish my anecdote.
Yes, go
Um,
ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, where people who lived their lives together, next to each other, who were neighbors, friends, basically family, started to hate each other. The animosity grew. And then, well, the war happened. People who used to be great friends together shot at each other, murdered each other, buried each other in unmarked mass graves. Dehumanization is an easy process.
Oh, very.
It requires basically no effort. In fact, it requires the opposite. If you want to disregard someone, you're gonna disregard them.
Oh yeah, we talked about this a lot in one of my classes on religious terrorism. We talked about the Yugoslav wars for that.
Yeah.
It's a very it's a sadly easy process.
I think the one example that comes to mind more than anything in this case is Rwanda.
Oh
Really.
yeah.
Rwanda, Bosnia,
Mm.
the Holocaust. It's a universal process.
It's a
Um,
sad reality. It's a sad thing
I
that's
think
happened, but like
I think it has always happened. But the thing is, it wasn't as ideologically driven as it has
yeah,
been in the 20th century.
Yeah,
what's
right wingers, take that phenomenon and basically weaponize it to get
in
this shit to happen.
in my book I was reading on Han nationalism, it said and I'm paraphrasing here, history is the raw materials for nationalism and reaction. And I think that's a really, really good thing to take away from that. Because you can see Han nationalism starts out very light, because right now there's a whole thing in China right now called I think it's the Chinese clothing movement, where they are intentionally trying to revive traditional Chinese clothing, which is, on a surface level, fine, nothing wrong with it, right? But it's the people who are promoting it and the motive they have behind it where they're talking about racial purity. Early Chinese
boy.
racial science, quote unquote, spoke of 5 races, and the Asian one was brought down to subgroups of Zhongzhen, middle peoples, so China, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. And then they had the Siberians, the Manchu, the Uyghurs, Mongolians, and the various Siberian nomad groups. Now, why were the Manchu considered of this race? Because it was politically advantageous, because Manchu held institutional power. Manchu held the throne, and by holding the throne, they held some kind of institutional power, which is bad. But then the Han twisted the knife and turned it into a racial thing and not a power thing. And as can be seen with the Boxer Rebellion, as I said earlier, he called the Manchu an inferior race. Again, to expand on this, because I think 24 minutes on this topic is well enough, right? I highly recommend reading a book called Manchus and Han by Edward J. Rhodes. Under the Heel of the Dragon, and I'm sorry I can't remember the author, but that talks about Xinjiang
Who's it
today.
published by?
Fuck.
Before we move on, would you guys mind if I got myself a drink?
Go ahead.
All right,
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
be back in 2.
Under the Heel of the
Yeah,
Dragon
King.
was written by Blaine Kaltman with a K. And then I recommend going to chuangcn.org, and they wrote a fucking amazing piece on terror in Xinjiang called Spirit Breaking. Please read that piece. I cannot recommend them enough. They are a
Link it in the Discord.
Chinese-based communist organization that works against the Chinese government.
Ugh.
Oh,
Man.
also read Wither China. For the China of tomorrow shall be the world of the commune. Wither China, 1967. Rip
A
the
new China, you say?
Rip the Shanghai Commune. Fuck the Red Guards. Why did you have to kill the fucking ultra fucking faction?
一手放荡伟大民中国。
没有西上当的没有弟兄国。
Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China. Yeah. Oof. You know, I was funny that, like, when you were talking about, like, you know, the dehumanization and the racial science thing and everything like that, and I'm just like, Shinzo Abe, is that you?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I wrote
hello.
4 essays on my fucking political Instagram page about this week. I'll write my @ in the
I've acquired a
chat.
cold one,
You have acquired a cold
Yay.
one.
which may be a good segue.
You can start talking on that mask thing if you want, Theo.
I prefer talking about the climate change.
All right, we can talk about that
Alright.
then.
Oh, fun.
Right. So
You mean that thing that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
over the end of June, Europe sent mainland Europe. Don't get your head up into your ass, Anglos. Mainland Europe faced the worst heat wave since we started recording temperature. For the most part, I think France had a worse one at some point, but they're the French. Who cares?
They're not
Well, I
people.
think the worst French heat wave was 1940. But anyway.
Yeah. Funny, Peter. You need organized resistance to create heat, but okay. Aside from that, no. So it was very bad. Now, what you have to remember. Okay, let me restart that. Max temperatures of I think 100 to 105 in some parts of Europe.
Ooh, shit.
Now, outside the Balkans, we don't have air conditioning. AC is not a thing here. So, if it gets that hot, it's that hot. You're gonna have to live with it.
And people sometimes die.
Yeah. We have had over these past few weeks, because there was a count, between 20 and 30 heat deaths,
Jesus.
which is absolutely ridiculous. But that's the low estimate. That's the ones where we know 100% certain heat stroke killed them.
Do you
That doesn't
know
count.
kind of?
But most heat deaths are people who lose control of their cars in the heat and crash into something.
I just want to interject for a second and also say that us Australians can't say, it's just a walk in the park. No, you don't. You gotta understand that if I understand correctly, the average temperatures in Europe are normally way lower.
Mhm.
And an
Yeah.
average
And
summer.
all the houses are built to accommodate this. Like this house I'm in right now is built to trap as much heat as possible, so that it stays nice and cozy in the winter. These houses are designed for a passive cooling sort of thing, where it cools down to 10 degrees Celsius in the night, and everything goes nice and smooth and cools down, and we're all happy in the morning. If it doesn't cool down under 25 degree in the night, you have a problem. A pretty big one, namely that the house doesn't cool down. It's a big problem in Vienna, because if you step out of the door in Vienna in the morning, in like say August, the air's fresh, the air's cool, but the buildings are all warm. They don't cool down. Now, imagine, if you will, if you are an American, if it's one of those really hot and humid days. So deserters will have to use their imagination. But basically, you step outside, there's a big pressure on you, because of the humidity, and the heat's really bad. And I imagine you can't get out of that. Anywhere you no matter where you go,
Mhm.
it's everywhere like that.
And then when you
Actually,
go
it's
inside, it gets worse.
yeah, it's warmer inside. There are times in the summer where I cannot be in my house because it's bad. And I made a tweet about this the other week, and I unironically had a bunch of Yanks try and fight me over how Europeans are just wimps or whatever. And then it basically implied that uh, I was being racist
What?
because oh uh you're
God.
whining about this heat when people in Africa are living in much more heat. Okay, cool.
Almost
Thing
like
is,
their buildings are
thing
made to
is,
accommodate it.
yes. Have you looked at like the regular buildings in cities in say Kinshasa, for example?
Mhm.
Walls are very thin. They're not insulated because they don't need to be.
Yeah,
mean,
also many places in Africa do in fact have AC and stuff, and the
Yeah.
idea that they all live in mud huts is actually incredibly
That's
racist.
really racist.
Oh
That's
yeah,
really
that's
racist.
like that's
Like-
some like Leopold shit.
I mean,
Like
it's
people,
not like
people
it's not
show
like
these
that.
show these tin like these fucking quote unquote tin huts is the term I always hear in like European media. Tin huts. Oh look, what in squalor they're living. Dude, it's just houses that aren't insulated. Our houses would look like that if we didn't have to insulate them from the minus 20 degrees in the winter.
Have a look at rural Australia, and you'll see that very clearly.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like
Mm.
this isn't a sign of primitive civilization. This is a sign of people realizing, actually, we don't need walls that thick. Why would we build walls that thick? Like this is something very interesting from an anecdote I read a while ago, where when colonials came to Africa, built houses in their style. After 10 years, they were all torn down because you couldn't actually live in them because they built walls, that were meant to accommodate winter conditions.
Mhm.
And then the winters were like 20 degree. And they were like, okay, if I step in there in the summer, I'm gonna die, huh?
It's almost like ridiculous when you think about that, because you've also got to factor in acclimatization. They live in this weather constantly
Yeah.
in Africa, and sub-Saharan
There's not this
Africans,
fluctuation. There's not this
They-
fluctuation.
their skin literally is super resistant and really does well at processing
Not just
UV.
that. Not just that.
It's
It's also
like
that so in arid conditions and in jungle conditions, aside from the Sahara, of course, temperatures are very consistent. If it's say 20 in the night, it's going to be about 30 in the day. That's a pretty good variation. And summer-winter variation isn't that big. Between 20 and say 50. That's the average variation in say semi-arid conditions. Now let's take Austria, my country, temperature variation.
Your country, you own it. It's yours.
I'm not responsible for it, thankfully, but no.
Technically, Austria is entirely collectively owned, isn't it?
Let's not get into that. But summer, round between 30 and 40 degree in summer. So let's say 35. Winter, between minus 10 and 0. That's the average temperature. That's a fluctuation of 50 degree.
You basically live in Threadbow for all my Australian.
Think about that. And the thing is, today in the heat, I think it was 29, 30 degree. And now that the heat wave has come off, 17 degree. That's a ridiculous jump in temperature.
But
and that's
how humid is it normally there?
Pretty humid.
Okay, so like here, shit.
It says forests everywhere.
So why is it when there's all of these constant record-breaking heat waves and strange climate phenomenons where it suddenly snows in Mexico? It's basically turning into the day after the tomorrow IRL.
It's turning into weather shuffle edition.
Got like 5 feet of hail earlier this week. It was fucking crazy.
Exactly. So when there is visual evidence of climate change, why do we still have climate change deniers?
Okay.
Because it's easier to accept that the world isn't coming to an end, and you just have these strange weather patterns.
There is this very common reflex. It's sort of a knee-jerk reaction when you hear news that personally affect you. The 5 stages of grief. You start going through them. You start rationalizing, and these people are perpetually stuck in denial, mainly because people. Now, it's a bit of a stretch, of course, and it's not the only reason. Very obviously not the only reason. But the thing is, the end of our stable climate means the end of the free market as we know it. People,
which is scary to them.
Oftentimes, can I finish? People oftentimes cannot even conceptualize the end of capitalism.
I just finished Capitalist Realism recently, and this is what Mark Fisher was talking about when he references the concept of the big other. It's like everyone knows it's true, that on some level that the market is responsible for this, but if you were just to out and say it, it would cause mass. If everyone was to accept it, there'd have to be major change.
Cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria.
Zizek talks about this in Living in the End Times. I didn't quite finish the book, but he talks about how we are going through the 5 stages of grief, and we will eventually hit a 0 point. And through that
one does not
point.
simply read Zizek. One does not simply read Zizek. One experiences Zizek.
Yeah, I do a lot.
Almost true. That's almost true.
The thing about climate change denialism is that it is almost entirely politically motivated, which, to an extent, separates it from other conspiracy theories. Sure, there's a lot of right-wing nut jobs that push your average nut job conspiracy theories, but a lot of the time, things like flat Earth, anti-vax aren't inherently political. They're just but in the case of climate change denialism, which big companies have a lot to lose. Separates it from other conspiracy theories. So let's say, what's a big oil company? Who's the Koch
BP.
brothers?
Exxon.
Let's take the Koch brothers because that's a relevant example. But yeah, BP. BP is so obsessed with holding the status quo that they will hire the CIA to overthrow a government, Iran. And people like the Koch brothers and so on will literally hire people. Will literally hire people to tell you that everything is fine, nothing's happening. It's all fine, and they will repeat this verbatim until they literally cannot. The problem is that capitalism has built this self-perpetuating foundation. And the thing is, that foundation is eternal growth, which if you know anything about the laws of entropy, you know is impossible.
Right.
You can't get more out than you put in.
It's funny. I actually explained this to a customer on the phone yesterday.
Yes.
The market isn't. Markets are inherently finite because the human race is inherently finite and resources are inherently finite, which means that you can't have ever expanding growth. Eventually, the market is going to have to contract by. The way I phrased it was, you literally run out of people to exploit.
Like this,
everybody becomes consumers.
Does your supervisor ever tap you on the shoulder and go like, "Can I just have a talk with you for a second there?"
You think the gigantic hammer and sickle on my backpack might be a bit of a giveaway? And being the trade union rep might be a bit of a
well, the logic of the
hold
Koch
on.
brothers. Go ahead, yeah.
Fuck, I forgot what it. So Peter, what were you saying? What was your last thing?
Oh, well, I was just going to say,
the
I
market
phrased
is
it
finite. That the market is finite, right? That's what we're saying.
The market is finite, and you eventually run out of.
Economically,
Yeah.
if you read any sort of economic news, stagnation is like, the most damning thing. But the thing is, in capitalist terms, stagnation is the only sustainable economic model in the world.
And ironically enough, that's it.
That's the thing, because without the capitalist whims of the market, we wouldn't calculate productivity by how much we produce. We would, when it's like ANCAPs always say, supply demand. We would measure the success of our production by how well it meets the demand, and not how much we produce. Period, because that's nonsense. Well, we produce more than we need, and this is the idiosyncrasy of capitalism at its core. The idea that you can that you would produce more than you need. It's like it's like putting on a pair of pants and then being like, you know what? I'm gonna put on 4 more. Why? Because I need to.
Well, it's Australia in winter, and I'm a pussy, so yeah.
Well,
I'm on
but there you have a
demand
for it. Imagine it's summer and you put on 4 pairs of like thick winter pants.
Pants in
better,
summer
you
is
create artificial demand for it by lowering your AC so that the house is like 40 degrees.
Good analogy.
Yeah, that's actually a very good analogy, Senna.
I was going to say about the Koch brothers is that to them, how old are they again? Like 70? They're old enough to be in the mindset of, fuck you, I got mine. Doesn't matter what happens after I die.
I don't even think that's age-bound at this point.
It's their position.
Yeah, it's fuck you, I got mine.
Yeah, people realize that shit's gonna fucking go down in the future. We're all gonna die. So, right-wingers, if you've noticed this, don't talk about the future anymore. People used to have conversations about how are we gonna handle the future. Now it's just about the present, because they know the future's fucked, and they can't, rationalize it as well anymore. All of this is subconscious, by the way. I'm not. This is something you always need to mention. We're not saying people are secretly holding all these, beliefs that they are actively hiding from the public. It's subconscious actions and beliefs that people often do not realize, not cognitize that they have. And now I'm done.
Convincing a customer to buy a copy of Wage, Labor, and Capital is really, really, really easy when you think about it.
Well,
Peter?
speaking of convincing, sorry, go
What?
ahead.
Peter, you are a treasure. Carry on. Okay.
I try.
Taking everything that we know, and especially this thing about how the right wingers won't look forward into the future. How do we as leftists try to convince people that no, we actually have a plan for the future? We know how to deal with climate change.
Well, for
Once again, how do we convince the liberals to be on our side?
The liberals? I don't know.
They are on our side. They just want climate change so they can keep drinking their lattes and making money and forgetting the third world exists.
You see, I think the big problem is this. I'm gonna use an Austrian expression here. I'm gonna roughly translate. People don't realize the house is on fire until the hat is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people will not realize liberals are ideologically always centered on their immediate surroundings, what they can literally witness. People will not realize that climate change is a problem until it strikes their immediate environment. And this is very relevant because we recently had European elections. Environmentalist parties made huge gains all across Europe. Why? Because climate change had started hitting the local populace. People have become personally affected by shit. People are literally dying of a heat exposure.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta do something.
To be
This
sure,
is
but
the problem.
I mean, to be sure that's true, but I was going to say, like, the interesting thing about the way in which capital is attempting to respond to its impending death, through environmental catastrophe, is, I believe, and this is reflected in the program of Extinction Rebellion, mass mobilization in order to destroy and then basically the entire sector of energy production and replace it by force. This is the
No.
Green New Deal. You don't think
No.
so? You don't think that?
No, I think liberals are still convinced that Extinction Rebellion, especially, is still convinced that what they gotta do is they gotta convince these CEOs to give up their power
Mm-hmm.
because they don't realize the way that it's structured. They can't they don't cognitize it.
Extinction Rebellion at the leadership is run by a sector of financial elites. They are people with a vested interest in preserving capitalism.
You want to know what I think Extinction Rebellion is? Now,
Sure.
I'm going to put on the tinfoil hat here and say that Extinction Rebellion is essentially a plot to get activists arrested.
I mean, yeah.
On the long run, lower the influence of social movements by basically neutering them and sacrificing people to a cause so that momentum then cannot be recycled for, say, a revolutionary movement.
Crypto are the same thing.
Yeah, I think the same thing at this point. I mean, hell, their latest scheme is a plan to shut down Heathrow Airport for 2 weeks using drones. After flying each drone operator will hand themselves into the police and face the possibility of a 5-year prison sentence. The aim is to have 415 activists arrested to reflect the fact that current atmospheric CO2 levels are at 415 ppm, levels last seen more than 3 million years ago before humans walked on the planet.
They're not even trying now. They're just trying to get people arrested.
They're actually trying to get as many people arrested as possible. I don't think this is a matter of stupidity anymore. I don't think that can be said.
Yeah,
I would recommend the if I may very quickly the documentary made by a YouTube channel called Prol Cult, I believe. I think it's called Selling Extinction, Very, very good critique of XR in that.
Yeah, definitely. I ultimately believe that organizations like Extinction Rebellion are, to an extent, control opposition. And the immediate effect, as I said, because I don't think I finished that thought specifically, is, you know, you can set an example by getting arrested. And people, the activists themselves, don't realize that it's not about martyring yourself. Activism isn't about being a martyr. That's the sort of idea people have in their heads. And that's why protesters tend to wear masks. Now that I have the segue set up, let's get into that. Why don't we?
I want to talk a couple things about the other climate things real quick. I can run through them in like a minute or two. Inner Mongolia is still having great leaps in desertification. The Gobi Desert is growing by the day. They're attempting to stop it with like planting forests in the area. The Brazilian rainforest since Bolsonaro's election has lost a football field's worth of tree coverage every second, and Antarctica is still getting fucked. Please read my friend's book, Lost Antarctica, where he talks about his experiences working there as a marine biologist. Now we can get on the mask.
Why do I get the mental image of Ben Shapiro standing at a podium saying, how could climate change be real when the Gobi Desert is increasing every day? That's a good thing.
No, the thing is, people don't realize that global warming doesn't just mean it gets warmer consistently, it also means the consistency of weather behavior collapses and you get more weather extremes, which is why Australia is having, cold. Very cold. Very, very cold.
Oh, also, portions of Inner Mongolia are running out of groundwater now, so we're fucked.
Yeah.
Jesus fucking Christ.
I guess you could say it's running them into the ground.
Haha, water.
Okay.
Fuck.
Isn't Iraq in the midst of a water crisis as well?
China will be
Everyone's in the
soon.
midst of a water crisis.
Yeah, but I think Iraq is mostly in an infrastructure crisis.
Guys, 1 billion climate refugees by 2030.
Woo!
Anyway.
I mean, you can just give us socialism by 2050.
Look, I ain't worried. You fucking Terresta cucks. I ain't worried. I got the dolphins on my side. I'll win.
Peter, don't
I'm
fuck
gonna be-
dolphins.
They'll just put you inside of a whale, and you can swim in the ocean.
Right.
Jonah was a Poseidon.
Welcome to
Confirmed.
the podcast where Peter gets ignored by a whale.
Alright.
We're gonna get fucking
Jonah
demonetized.
Poseidon gang.
But back to Theo's mask
Just
thing.
gonna go to Google here. Whale vor.
Okay, no.
Theo's topic, be gone. Demon.
Right, mask laws. Let's talk about mask laws.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They suck.
Yeah. So
We have him here.
let's ask our resident Yanks. What happened in Portland?
A lot of things.
Some guy, fucking alt-light guy named Andy got punched or something, and now he's made a media shitstorm about him being punched.
Well,
so this is the demonstration in Portland where Andy Go was attacked.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we're talking about
apologies
that
on the name
specifically.
pronunciation, and where that older gentleman was photographed with blood running down his face, and people are trying to use that as a look at the dangerous and violent Antifa left. That's the one we're talking about.
They're the real fascists.
Now, this sort
Love
of
how America pretends the Ku Klux Klan doesn't exist anymore.
yeah. These events have caused debates, even in Europe. Now, we have a lot of terrible news, a lot of, we discussed a lot of shitty things today. So why not a bit of nice news interjected? Um, Today, no, actually not today. Yesterday, the Austrian Constitutional Court reached the decision that chant ACAB, all cops are bastards. It's not defamation. It's entirely legal, not grounds for arrest, and the police has to release 50 detained protesters.
Nice.
I think
Which
another
is
piece of
historic.
great happy news. Another piece of great happy news is that for our Californian comrades out there, I hope you survived Freedom Quake 2019. America decided to celebrate its independence by ripping apart a small part of it.
Yeah, no, but in all seriousness, let's because in Europe there are a lot of conservative governments that are trying to push through anti-mask laws, despite the fact that, well, they can't do that. They literally can't do that. It's not in the Constitution. Well, the Constitution forbids it, rather.
I take it anti-mask laws are an attempt to be subservient about making anti-Antifa laws. An
Yes.
attempt to try
The
to
thing
stop
is,
people organizing and wearing masks.
not just wearing masks. It's often like in Denmark, I think it was. They basically, when the parliament wouldn't push through an anti-mask law to prevent protesters, they pushed it through under the guise of we're gonna ban burqas because
It's what they're doing here in Australia as well.
Yeah, because
What they're trying to do.
when you're trying to intimidate people into not being able to wear masks, just be racist. Make it
Oh,
about
yeah, that'll make
it
people
about
be like, oh,
make it
okay.
about the brown people, and then no one will care.
It's like they
Well,
forget
their civil
fucking
liberties.
Orthodox nuns and the Ku Klux Klan. It's
Yeah.
like they don't exist.
They're almost in
Also,
certain places shooting
Scarf-
themselves in the foot because when they try to go after Antifa and say, we're going to unmask you with an unmasking law, no one at a protest is allowed to wear a face covering of any kind, and it gets passed, and then all the Proud Boys and all of the right wingers suddenly get arrested for wearing masks. I say that, but
no one ever arrests right-wing protesters.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
But the thing is, there are places in Austria where it is commonplace to. I don't know where that sentence went, but what I wanted to say is that the draft that the parliament put through last year, I read through it. It would ban the wearing of scarves in public because it covers,
Scarves.
quote, you are not allowed to wear any piece of clothing that covers your face in whole or part. So shades are now illegal. They're not because it didn't pass, because the parliament took a good look at this, and then everyone was like, that seems dumb. Let's
The
not
Great
do that.
Austrian Sunglasses Ban of 2019.
No. Let's go over this. Caps would have been illegal. Caps with that sun thing, because that obscures things.
I'm surprised that there's any competency in that high in parliamentary politics. Really, I'm very surprised that in I think it's Victoria they managed to get to give police the power to demask people because it's there's some law or provision when you're not allowed to wear a face covering in public.
I can't attest to that. I'm not exactly sure, but I can tell you a story of one of our comrades that was charged for animal abuse for putting his palm up to a police horse. Like,
What?
I'm not joking. Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous.
I guess the only way you could.
I have a friend that was charged with assaulting an officer for petting a police dog.
Wow.
In Alabama, we are not allowed to wear a mask in public unless on a public holiday like Halloween because of anti-clan laws.
Well,
That's
then.
interesting.
Hmm.
Interesting.
All right. So when we want to protest, when we want to go out and demonstrate, and email does not advocate violence. When we need to get a little rowdy, let's say, how can we do it? How can we protect ourselves?
Okay, here's the thing. Strength in numbers. If you have 4 people out on the streets in masks, they're going to arrest them. If you have 400 people out on the streets, they can't arrest 400 people. They just
Yeah.
can't.
Hmm.
They
It's
might be
called
able
a
to pick up
block
some
for a
stragglers,
reason.
but that's about it.
Yeah, but if you're wearing a mask, you're going home, they got nothing on you. What are they going to do? They don't know who you are, they don't know where you're from, and even if they do, they can't prove you were there. You wore a mask. There's no identification for you. So, yes, some people are going to get arrested. We're going to get stragglers getting arrested. That's kind of always been the reality of protests.
But it's also
Mm.
the case that if you have a block, you can help
Yeah.
the people who are.
That's what the black bloc is for. It's not just for, smashy stuff. It's
Mm.
also for protecting protest lines against the police trying to break up a protest.
That's
That's also a very good thing. Like breaking up a protest. That's what they do when they realize they can't just arrest them all.
I think that's a key thing to really extrapolate as well. The black bloc isn't just there to attack the cops; they're there to protect the protest.
Yeah.
Because at any time a police officer says, "No, you can't march here," that's as weird as it sounds. That's an attack on the protest. Because if the marshals say, "Oh, okay, we'll just shift people over," that's the immediate thing. The police know, like, "Oh, okay, they're pushovers. We can tell them what to do now." It's like, "All right,
Yeah.
it's an hour until your permit is up, but we're going to declare an illegal assembly anyway."
Yeah. So what the this is a good example. So every year, there's Pride Parade in Vienna, right? And every Pride Parade, there's called what's called the March for the Family, also in Vienna, which is the Conservative Party marching alongside Polish neo-Nazis from all across Europe.
Mm.
But whatever, you know. And this the reason that Pride Parade doesn't have as many people as other European cities is because most people are at the counter protest to that march. Sitting there yelling at the fash, throwing stuff at them. A few years ago, the police was like, actually, you can't stand there because the march needs to go through there. So we're going to have you assemble over there. You want to know what the city of Vienna decided to do?
Mm.
Fuck you, pigs. We're just going to assemble here anyway. And the march was stalled for like the police realizing they had blocked themselves out of their march out. They had to very painstakingly direct the march into small alleyways, got into skirmishes with the fucking rally they were trying to protect because they got rowdy and started attacking the police officers when they encountered a second mob of counter protesters. The police packed up and went home.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Civil disobedience works. That's why people stand on roads. If you obstruct an unjust system, if you keep the executive body from, executing the unjust laws, what are they going to do? If they can't, because, yeah, sure, they could shoot all of you, but most likely they're not gonna, because then all the people are going to be standing on the street.
So would you agree that we gotta, in a way, make this anti-mask law unenforceable?
Yes,
And that's it.
Oh
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I
So we,
think the greatest example I have for this sort of thing that Theo's talking about is at my union delegates conference. My union delegates conference last week. This is what separates my union from a lot of the other unions in Australia, including the CMFEU. My union, the National Union of Workers, soon to be UWU, unironically. Watch dish. Class 1L.
I'm so sorry, I'll
love you.
stop.
I fucking love you, Senna. No, what happened is the guy stood up at the front of the room and said, "All right, you'll remember what happened at Chemist Warehouse, which was a great victory for our union. They went on strike and they attacked the distribution centers, literally. The distribution centers couldn't send the product out to the stores because our guys literally, masks, red flags, everything, blocked their driveways for their trucks and stood there and prevented the distribution from going. Eventually, the management actually had to resort to shipping out the orders for the stores in the back of management's cars, like managers' cars. Right? And the thing was, to quote the guy at the front, he was wearing a Change the Rules t-shirt, and he's like, "Look, I love the front of this t-shirt. It says union. It's a great shirt. But you see the back of this Change the Rules? How the fuck did that go for an election slogan? The truth is, guys, if we want to make change, it's not change the rules, it's break the rules." And I'm like, illegalist praxis, yes, let's go.
Oh my god.
And he's like, look, and Mark followed up, my trade union organizer for South Australia for the NUW, basically followed up by saying, look, hey, we are not going to know where the limit for what we don't control what the rules are in Canberra. We don't get to vote on that. The workers have no say. So the only way we're going to find out where the rules really stop is to push them as far as they can.
Fuck
now,
yes.
I'm sure you're law-abiding citizens, but I could find a law you're breaking probably sitting here right now. The point is, we got to break the ones that matter to get them changed. And I'm like, let's go!
Here's the thing. Why do general strikes work? Why do things like general strikes work? It's because the executive body of the state can only enforce its laws if the people allow it to. If people do not allow the state apparatus to do its job, the state's just a bunch of fancy titles that we can kick over tomorrow. We need to now this doesn't, just mean smashy stuff. What it means is civil disobedience, mass action to prevent unjust laws from being enforced. Because if you prevent unjust laws from being enforced, if you prevent them from deporting people, from arresting people, they can write as many racist laws as they want. If they can't get to the people they want to arrest, what's in the Constitution or in the laws doesn't fucking matter.
There's actually an example of this already in America, I think, where people are really starting to fight back against ICE, not just standing in the driveways of ICE detention centers, but finding where their vans are and snipping the tire refill, the air connected part, so that they can't refill it. Right, you got to use a good pair of pliers and be ready for the blowback of the air. EML does not advocate violence. So you just cut the tires on all four of them, and then they can't drive around. Even on the spare one, if you can. EML does not advocate violence. Just but yeah, it's like there's a real sense of duty
vandalism
to be
isn't
civilly.
violence.
Oh, good. Okay,
To the
then do it.
Americans
Do it.
but
Vandalize
Americans
everything.
think. Seriously,
Um,
Americans will freak out on you about property damage as if you killed their fucking child or something.
I don't care. I'm gonna key your car.
Same.
It's it's as if despite the reactionary reaction against damaging private property, there's a real sense of duty to disrupt and be civilly disobedient towards ICE now. How do we get that to spread, not just at ICE, but at the
Well,
system,
by making it
I'd
man.
say it's
precedent and
already
process.
starting. I think it's
making it-
already starting.
By making it a precedent at protests, whenever you have large groups of people assembled, break the rules. You know,
Yes.
you don't gotta do huge things. You can't, just smashy overthrow the state tomorrow. But what you can do is you can normalize disobedience against the state, against the system. You can normalize breaking the rules. Once you do that, that opens up the floodgates. Then people start to think about, where does it stop? Does
You
it
know,
stop?
I think there was a moment at one of the Change the Rules rallies. I think the first one that I went to, where along the route we went past a courtroom where two union guys were in the law courts, and we were chanting and whatnot at the law court. So we marched along. We stopped out front of it, started chanting, but I could see that they got a bunch of marshals to line up in front of the law court, because the NUW were getting real rowdy, and it looked like they were about to storm the law courts. I'm like, is this it? Oh my god, is this it? Is this the start? Is it going to
Can I just say, I fucking love my union. I
Like
really
in
do love my
like in
union.
Hong Kong where they recently stormed the fucking government building.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
like
they actually did it. The Mad Lads did it,
this is the thing.
and then threw up the Union Jack, of all things.
This is the thing at the Change the Rules rally in Adelaide. The NUW membership. I was on the like the podium area where it was going on. So I was up amongst the officials and the rally organizers. But what was funny is once we got enough people together, the tram line for the city was behind us, and so what we did was we threw off the marshals and the cops, and the entire protest spread out across the tram line. We held up public transport in Adelaide for 2.5 hours. I couldn't go anywhere. We're just like, oi, nah,
This is the
union
thing.
protest, fuck off.
This is the thing. Small actions like that can do more than enough. Like, you get 50 people, you wait until the train stops and then you sit in front of the train. Train can't stop. The thing is, 50 people. They can't arrest 50 people.
They can try.
They can try, but that's why we form a black bloc.
Exactly.
If you
Um,
don't let them pull anyone out, they're not going to be able to do anything, and eventually
See,
they're going to have to go home.
the main reason why the Change the Rules rallies were getting onto the news was because of the disruption that it caused. If it was just held in a park and traffic was fine, there'd be one tiny little mention on the news where they say, "Oh, some unionists were gathered in a park." That's about it. But because in Melbourne and Adelaide and I think Sydney as well, because we shut down the middle of the city and made a massive disruption, suddenly people started to listen. Although, there was a bunch of boomers that were like, "Oh, why can't they just go to work? I'm trying to be able to drive to my whatever it is I do when I'm a
And here's
boomer."
the thing. Those people are loud, but those people never represent the general populace. Because, yeah, you possibly did directly disrupt the lives of some of these people. The thing is, people don't stay mad forever. And if people aren't, actually malicious to your cause, they're gonna start thinking, why'd they do that? Why would you do that? And
You got to keep people agitated, would you say?
Yeah, you gotta keep people in a state where they have reason to think about stuff. And if people have time to think about stuff, people realize, holy shit, what the fuck? This is stupid. What the fuck?
I will say that in my union, the NUW, several of my friends are organized. Where after the Liberals won the previous election, the truth of the matter is, a lot of us, a lot of the organizers, such as my friends and the delegates, myself included, we're getting angry at the strikes that are going on because we keep winning them. We get ready to go. We get ready to get smashy and start, going on strike, and then the company caves because the entire workforce came out. It's like, no, we want to start shit.
God damn it.
What?
We're too effective.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If you keep doing that, two possible outcomes happen. Either you get more and more concessions, more and more, or you don't, and then you hit a wall. When you hit that wall, people are like, "What the fuck? Why is there a wall there?" The people that are at those protests are going to start thinking, "Let's get rid of the wall." Here's the thing.
Why do we
That's
build
why
the wall?
protesting it can't have mass action can't have negative outcome in the sense we can't end up worse than we already were. Just by the very nature of it. Yeah, sure, they can try to crack down, but that's like, trying to solve an electrical fire by dumping a bucket of water over it. You're just gonna electrocute yourself.
like
It's a good
I remember
analogy.
seeing some Reddit idiot go off on like, well, you can't just block off things in protest because then you just annoy people and no one wants to bother with it. And it's like,
That's the point.
they might be annoyed
That's the
in
whole
the immediate, but they'll get over that and then think
trying to-
about it.
And some
Most
and some
people
of them
are
will
not
just be
gonna
annoyed
like,
forever.
"Oh, yeah."
Who cares?
Yeah, there's like a
You know what I
handful
mean?
of people that's gonna be, but this guy was like, oh, well, everyone's just gonna permanently hate you in your cause. You're just hurting it. It's like, no, not really. Most people
During
are
the
gonna
civil
forget about
rights-
it within a
sorry.
week.
Yeah, during the civil rights movement, the majority of white Americans believed that the civil rights activists were hurting their cause by protesting. Believed that they should just say nothing and hope that
Yeah.
lawmakers will be merciful to them. And that's the outrageous thing. If I may address the half a liberal in our mentions, in our watching, so no one. There's 14 people watching. I'm pretty sure all of them are communists. But listen, nobody ever changed anything by doing what's acceptable. Nobody ever. Because if you can change something and it is acceptable, it's not a substantial change. If you want a fundamental change, you get this, gotta change it fundamentally.
You get a bunch of sugar, right, and you
Mhm.
dump it in the concrete so that the concrete is useless.
In other
Okay,
words,
that's a good tactic. Also-
alternatively, you could just get mud and throw that at people for the same effect.
Now, the way you make a smoke bomb, a big one, to distract the cops when you're trying to march, is you start with a bucket.
you get where you make a smoke bomb is you get a cigarette and a bucket. You smoke the
Okay,
cigarette and then you
I
put
was
the bucket on
joking.
your head.
No, stop. Let's
no,
not get worse than demonetized. Let's not get a strike.
Yeah.
Okay, so the art of utilizing uranium-258 effectively.
Okay, Pac-Man.
The
Now-
phrase RBMK comes to mind.
Yes. Okay. There was not graphite. You didn't see graphite.
Now you get
Go to
you get
Go to the toilet.
the cake and you put it in the container with some other ingredients and some icing.
Dip dab,
Mm.
I'm gonna dip dab.
And then
I'm
you
gonna,
throw another small piece of cake really quickly into it.
dip
Mhm.
dab, Peter. I'm gonna throw you two into reactor 4.
What reactor? It's not there.
Chernobyl never had a power plant. I don't know what you're talking about. Chernobyl
I will
is not
bask
a
in
real
atoms'
place.
glow and be divided.
Briba is not a real city. I don't exist. Moscow, never heard of it.
Okay,
I
think
actually
we've
haven't
gone
watched that
off
show
the
yet.
rails a
I
bit.
need to. I need to see Chernobyl. I haven't
I
watched it yet.
apologize profusely for my bad Russian accent.
It is not as bad as mine, comrade. Mine is even worse. I sound like Boris, who had sex with Australian woman and created mutant baby, which is now speaking to you right now.
You see, whenever I do a Russian accent, I just sound like a very bored bureaucrat. Please,
Now you
please
see,
sign.
when I do Russian accent, I sound like sexy lady you see in movie. But I am not sexy. I am disgusting.
You are very sexy. Anyway,
Is
No.
the word for it honey?
I think we've gone.
Pashtovska.
I think we've gone far enough off topic for an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
there is no topic, comrade. I don't know what.
So does anybody
We
have
haven't
any
finished topics.
closing remarks? I guess.
I just want to say, as my closing remark, I apologize profusely for arriving late to my own stream, but thank you to DipDap for stepping in. You're a mad lad. I owe you a pizza.
All right.
I don't really have anything other than shameless self promotion. But the truth, the news there is that Posadus Pac-Man, my channel is actually, I guess, semi-officially now in collaboration with Shonen Ronin, the other leftist anime channel on YouTube.
Nice.
And we are collaborating on projects in the future, I hope. So subscribe to them. They're a fun bunch if you're a weeb like me. They're also edgy cunts like me, which is great.
Hey,
Commune?
Pac-Man, if you
Never
guys
heard
ever
of
need
it.
an anime girl voice, just hit me up.
Oh.
Oh god.
Yeah, you are my. You do realize in Mark's Abridged you are going to literally play every female character because we don't have anyone else.
That's fine. I have
Get-
the range.
get
to
onto
perform
that.
this challenge.
All right. So Theo, Senna, Mushroom, anything for closing remarks?
I heard that this Theo person is a big asshole. Seriously, fuck her.
I heard that she's a huge fucking cutie, and I love her a lot.
That sounds like a counter-revolutionary propaganda.
Comrade
you fucking
Ryakov
Trotskys.
did nothing
do
wrong.
Like me, honey.
Fuck
I
you,
love
Peter.
You.
Fuck you, Peter. I'm going to throw you into a reactor. I mean, there is no reactor. You do not exist. Fuck.
Well, all right.
Email doesn't exist.
I
Carry
guess
on,
with this Ukrainian LARPing, I guess this is the end of this
Ukraine
week's
does not exist, comrade.
Evening with Comrades. See you next time when Uyghurs are still in concentration camps. Woo!
The Russian is